Good evening. It is time we end this, shall we? Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Happy Halloween! Today we are returning to Big Finish Classics one more time to conclude the Dracula Trilogy with Dracula's War, released in February 2022, based on the works of Bram Stoker, written by Jonathan Barnes, directed by Scott Hancock. Dracula's War stars Silas Carson, Mark Gatiss, and Deirdre Mullins. Also featured in the cast, one moment. If you're new to my channel, whenever I do these Big Finish reviews, when I sort of recap or list who's in the cast, I do it based on the billing as presented on the cover of the CDs. This one had kind of a big list, and I didn't get the chance to memorize it, so I've written it down. So, anyway, Silas Carson, Mark Gatiss, Deirdre Mullins. Also featured is Moronka Akinola, Hannah Arterton, Simon Lutters, Glenn McCready, Colin McFarlane, and Susan Wokema. As always, there is a blanket spoiler warning in place. I do these unscripted, so I put this in place just in case I do decide to veer into spoilers. If you do not wish to be spoiled, then in the description box below is the link to Big Finish's website where you can purchase Dracula's War. And just a warning, I may possibly be more forthcoming with spoilers than I have tried to be. Some of the stuff in this particular set I cannot talk about without going into spoilers. Also, there will be spoilers for Dracula's guests as well. Had I known characters and plot elements from Dracula's guests would be relevant here, I would have been more forthcoming with the spoilers, but price you pay when you listen to things for the first time. This is a really solid set. It's very different from Dracula and Dracula's guests. If I had to wager a guess why, I would say because this is an entirely original work. It's sort of set in the world of Dracula and sort of around the novels Bram Stoker wrote, in particular Dracula and Dracula's guests, and Dracula and his collection of short stories, Dracula's Guests and Other Dark Tales, I should say. But this one isn't particularly based on anything. Jonathan Barnes took characters and plots from those previous works and sort of propelled them forward. And I think that originality is really what makes this set so different stylistically. Also, it's kind of going for a different subgenre of horror. Dracula was kind of more mystery, suspense thriller with a supernatural bend to it. Dracula's Guests was very much gothic, atmospheric horror. Dracula's War is very much action horror. They're kind of like Aliens. That's the best example I can think of when it comes to action horror. I already said this. I have a theory, especially based on how this box set ends, because it kind of ends on a cliffhanger, that the original idea was to kind of leave the Dracula stuff open-ended so that they could keep going, kind of spin it off into its own series, kind of like how Big Finish did with Dorian Gray. Also as part of the Big Finish Classics, they adapted Oscar Wilde's book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, but then from that series, they spiraled off into a spin-off of their own, The Confessions of Dorian Gray. I have a theory that they were trying, and possibly still are, who knows, they're trying to do the same thing with Dracula. But enough about that. So, since the end of Dracula, remember, Dracula's Guests was a prequel. Since the end of Dracula, the world has seen many changes, including the turn of the century. We are now in the 20th century, the 1900s, and World War I. And at this point in the war, due to the increasing casualties, people are beginning to resort to drastic measures to try and end the war, including resurrecting Dracula. So, because of that, Dracula is sort of the end game. He is the final boss, so to speak. But really, our main antagonist is a man named Evelyn Skinsale, a British nobleman played by Silas Carson. Skinsale was introduced in Dracula's Guests. He was introduced in the final story, The Inspector's Tale, and he was trying to impede Renfield's investigation of these murders going on because of their ties to the nobility, and he was worried, bringing them to light would kind of destabilize society. And as he tried to tag along and make himself a presence in the investigation, he witnessed Dracula communicating with Renfield, an act that ultimately drove him insane. And he sort of realized the power Dracula had, and sort of, well, it ended on a cliffhanger that where he just kind of realized what was a threat, and he told Renfield's psychiatrist at the time, he basically confirmed everything that happened to Renfield is true, but swore him to secrecy just in case he needed it in the future. And the future is now, in the ever increasing casualties of the First World War. Skinsale, wow, I blanked on his name for a second, decides they need to resurrect Dracula and have them fight the war in their place. It is, of course, a monumentally stupid idea, and the story does play it like that. But also, Silas Carson and Jonathan Barnes' writing portray Skinsale as a truly despicable, reprehensible man. Like, he goes through this very twisted character arc throughout this set. As he starts off, there is sort of a reluctance to it. It's like, I don't want to do this. A part of me knows this is wrong. But as the story goes on, he sort of gets more corrupt and more... I forgot what I was going to say, so I'll just say he gets more into it. Where, he finds himself doubtless. He believes what he's doing is right. And he starts to commit some really despicable acts as a means to an end. Like, once Dracula is resurrected in the final story, one of his allies, who was helping him to this point, Skinsale sees no use for him anymore, so he just gives him to Dracula to feed on. And Silas Carson just does so good at playing this man for the reprehensible rat bastard he is. Also, because this is... Wow, I completely forgot about this. So, in terms of formatting for the box set, I'm going to backtrack a bit before I keep going. This set consists of 3 stories, much like Dracula's Guest did. The Convent, the Madhouse, and the Forest. But unlike Dracula's Guests, where the 3 stories kind of weave together to create an overarching plot, this is one story. This next story in the set picks up where the first one left off. They aren't really gaps. They aren't like episodes in a season. It's just like, they're like chapters in a book, So it's like, you don't get a complete story from just listening to one story in the set. You need all 3 stories to listen, to get the full story. And I love when Big Finish does this. I've talked about this in the past. I believe these one-story box sets are truly some of the best output Big Finish does. Stories like going to Doctor Who for a bit, Unit Dominion, the Ninth Doctor Adventures Ravagers. I will defend that Ravagers is good, not as good as other stories in the Ninth Doctor Adventures, but it is good. Countermeasure Series 4, The Diary of River Song Series 11, Friend of the Family. Things like that Dracula's War is doing, and it's to its benefit because the story plays... Because the extra runtime that this one story gets to play out really helps it build up. Really helps it build up. What do I mean by that? I'll talk a little more about that. But when where do I want to go from there? So, because that was a tangent talking about the format of the box set. I was talking about Skinsale. Also, in Skinsale's pursuits to revive Dracula, he has captured Sabine. Sabine was another character introduced in Dracula's Guest. She cameoed in the first and last story, but her biggest role was in the second story, The Vampire's Tale. During a war with the Ottoman Empire, when a village in Transylvania kind of went rogue and started committing terrorist attacks against them, Dracula, realizing the retaliation against the Ottomans would be really bad for Transylvania, sort of unleashed the plague upon this village. Sabine was the sole survivor. Somehow, it's never explicitly said how, much to the story's benefit, Sabine gains divine powers. Like she becomes a seer, she can see the future, and she has other divine powers that aren't really enunciated on. Is that the right word? And Dracula turns her into a vampire. So, going from there, somehow, it's never said again, Skinsale has captured Sabine, and he is trying to use her as well. Over the course of this, there is a reporter named Beatrice Fuller, and she kind of catches wind of what Sabine is doing. Just whispers and rumors, but nothing definite, nothing concrete. Realizing, what would happen if the word gets out, Skinsale gives Beatrice to Sabine to feed and kill her. But this is truly the first sign of that dark, twisted character arc that Skinsale goes down. But what he doesn't know initially is that Sabine doesn't kill Beatrice. She turns her, which then, of course, Beatrice frees Sabine so they can go about their own business. And if I had any critiques of Dracula's War, it would be that the Sabine and Beatrice plotline is the weakest because it's underdeveloped. Every so often we cut back to Sabine and Beatrice. Not often enough for my taste to truly develop the plot, but every so often it's just Beatrice adapting to being a vampire. Like, she's trying to reconcile the guilt she has over having to drink human blood, or she's learning about her powers. That's pretty much all it is. And again, it's just undercooked, especially because Sabine and Beatrice play a role in the final story. Especially Sabine, she plays an important role in the climax of this story. And it's so underdeveloped getting to that point, especially when we get there, and suddenly, even though the characters have never interacted, Beatrice becomes a thrall of Dracula. Like, they communicate telepathically, again, despite having never met, and suddenly she is a loyal servant of Dracula. Because it's so underdeveloped, it's a moment that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but given how the story ends, I'm sure it would have been explored further in the future. Regardless, so other plot points to talk about, and other points to talk about for review. While this is happening, how do I want to approach this? Because there's two ways to go about this. While this is happening, a convent sort of gets word that Dracula is about to be revived, and realizing what a disaster that would be, they perform something called the Ritual of Blood to revive one of Dracula's greatest enemies, Abraham Van Helsing. And I want to applaud the first story, The Convent, for this, because they do this really good misdirect where it makes it sound like, being as cryptic as possible, they're actually going to be the ones to revive Dracula until the reveal that it's Van Helsing. Now, in Dracula, Van Helsing was played by Nigel Betts. In Dracula's Guess, and again Dracula's War, he has been recast to now be played by Glenn McCready. And I want to applaud Glenn McCready for this, because it took me a second to register, but because he sounds so much like Nigel Betts and his take on the character. Glenn McCready is always a solid performer, and no different here. Just playing the wide range of emotions and able to embody the way Nigel Betts played Van Helsing so well, whilst also making it his own character. And through this course, we learn that in order to revive Dracula, Skinsale needs 3 ingredients: a tincture that he procured from a Zagani witch. The Zagani are a group of Romani people that Dracula particularly relied on, which he has already acquired. A painting that has Dracula's essence contained within. This was the painting Jeremiah Hart made in Dracula's Guess, and this painting was how the convent knew Dracula was returning, because it was in their care, and it is now in Van Helsing's care. And a vessel that also has sort of the spirit of Dracula within him. That vessel is Jonathan and Mina's son, Quincy Harker, which, if you remember, which was hinted at this and was always seemed to kind of be this idea that there was going to be sequels. This was kind of hinted in their ending of Dracula, which was made back in 2016, whereas Dracula's Guess and Dracula's War were made in I believe they were both made in 2020 or both released in 2020, but so there was always this idea that this was going to come back. Speaking of, you know, wow, Van Helsing teaming up with a nun from the convent named Sister Angelique decides, realizes there is one place where the painting could be kept safe. In the possession of Mina Harker. And Deirdre Mullins is the standout performer of this set. She gives such an incredible performance. Of course, it's the turn of the century. Mina is much older now, and she has gone through so much since the events of Dracula. With Van Helsing being revived, Mina is presumably the last surviving member of their original company. Quincy died in the climax of Dracula, Quincy Morris. It's implied, because all she says is everyone went their separate ways, but it's strongly implied that, what is his name? God, the doctor's name, I'm forgetting it. It'll come to me. But it's assumed that Arthur Holmwood and I just forgot that doctor's name, and it is bugging me now. But yeah, they died. And similarly, because of the events of Dracula and how that adaptation played them, Jonathan and Mina got divorced. That's all that seemed to be said about that, but after that scene, there is no mention of Jonathan again, so I'm going to assume he died as well. Point is, Mina is now the last living member of that original sordid business. And then similarly, with the outbreak of World War I, she believes Quincy, who enlisted and went to serve, is dead as well, unaware of the truth at that moment. The scene where Van Helsing and Mina reunite is wonderfully well done, and Mina gets a lot of scenes like that throughout this series. She's older, wiser, more experienced, but she has to shoulder this massive trauma she endured. Actually, it's kind of funny. Again, this was made in September 2020. In the behind the scenes, in an interview with Scott Hancock, Deirdre Mullins and Scott Hancock kind of likened this portrayal of Mina to Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode in Halloween 2018. And it is a very fitting comparison to make. But of course, as the way the story plays out, they can't keep the painting safe. Skinsale gets his hand on all three ingredients, and through Quincy Harker, Dracula is reborn. And I want to say, this story has a really good building sense of tension. Like, as it slowly gets closer and closer to the inevitable return of Dracula, the tension continues to rise, and you are just gripped by it. You are on the edge of your seat, waiting for it to happen. Just how is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? This story does tension so much better than Dracula or Dracula's Guests did. And those were both really good as well. And as for the man himself, Dracula really only does appear in the final segment, in the final story in this set. But Mark Gatiss plays him so well, once again. This is Dracula at his most sinister, at his most malevolent, at his most evil, because he kind of thrives off the bloodshed of World War I. He, after Skinsale proposes this idea of serving the British Army, of course he's not going to just do that. He's going to try and take control, of course. Dracula has his own designs. He taunts Mina with the fact that he is only alive because he is using her son as a vessel, and he delights in the pain that causes her. Just Mark Gatiss, like in Dracula, is not in a lot of this set, but you feel his influence all the way building up to his return, and you feel his influence even when he's off screen. As I kind of said in the opening of this review, Dracula's War is stylistically very different from Dracula or Dracula's Guests, and I'm assuming because it is an original work. Like, it kind of struck me on my re-listen before this review. This is a legacy sequel. If you're unfamiliar with that phrase, it's kind of something horror has been doing lately. years after a horror franchise ends, they kind of do this sequel with as much of the original cast or original ideas as possible, kind of propelling the story, and using the age gap between the original movie and this most recent one as a way to move the story forward, and using that the passage of time as an element in the story itself. Like I said in the behind the scenes, Deirdre Mullins and Scott Hancock compared Mina to Laurie Strode in Halloween 2018. That is a legacy sequel. Excuse me. Gonna have a coughing fit. Excuse me. But Dracula's War is really good. If, again, just like I said, in its execution, very modern. It's really hard deciding which I like more, this or Dracula's Guess. But overall, this entire trilogy has been worth it. But those are just my thoughts. Have you heard Dracula's War? What are yours? Start a conversation in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. Share the video around. All of it helps my channel grow. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you guys next time.